Thank you so much. Thank you, Zen Master Bonhei, for having me. Thank you to the Sangha. My teacher Tim showed up, and to my friends and family, and some of my trans community that have shown up here today to engage in this conversation. This is a great time to be having this talk and conversation in our country's history. And I ask that you please be patient with my voice. If you need me to repeat something, just let me know. I am battling a mild case of pneumonia that was exacerbated by my addiction to vaping. So good PSA to quit smoking and vaping now. 37 years ago, I was born. And the doctors and my parents, they perceived my body. And with all the knowledge they had, they declared boy. And that was no problem. Until I got to school age, and I noticed that there were expectations of what boy meant that didn't vibe with anything I wanted to be or do. And having a dad who was a SWAT team member and Marine made it really clear that this is this idea of boy, this is me, and there's this great chasm that I feel is unbridgeable. So that created some dissonance, and I remember getting really sad at around the age of 8 when I used to be a really happy kid, by all accounts from my family. And then when I hit puberty, that sadness transformed to anger. And I became a really angry kid, and I would lash out and be very violent. And then that anger turned inwards, into suffering, into depression, and into suicidal ideation and attempts. And I tried so many times to end my existence as a declared boy on this earth. But luckily, I encountered practice early enough. And I showed up, I skateboarded incredibly stoned to Against the Stream Meditation Center one morning, and Tim Callahan, my teacher, was there teaching. And it introduced me to this practice. And this practice opened up a space to where I could start to feel the suicidal ideation, and I could start to feel the depression. And I started to see that there was a gap, that I didn't have to react and respond and take orders from every thought that was arising and every feeling that was arising. So there was a little bit of there are thoughts and feelings, and maybe I'm not these, but still suffering. So that suffering was this great wake-up fuel to keep practicing. And I kept practicing, and I came into contact with the quantum school and this great practice of don't know. And I started to practice this don't know. I started to investigate with some curiosity the root of that suffering. Where is the suffering coming from? Because by all accounts, you're living the prescribed life that should have made you happy. And the encounter with the practice of returning to primary point, asking the question of what is this, and allowing our don't know center to compassionately respond. That saved my life. And this practice saved my life, and I think it has the potential to save so many lives, especially in the trans community, which is suffering extra lately. So when I started practicing this, what is this? I created this space from feelings and thoughts. I started to investigate the root of the suffering. And this crazy thing came out, this spontaneous answer, this compassionate response to my suffering came out, and I dived in with 2 feet, and I transitioned, and I changed my name, and I changed my form. And I had no idea 6 years ago that that would change anything for the better, but I just dove in. And it did. And it satisfied that itch of wanting to die. And that was fantastic. And 6 years later, here I am. And I still have suffering, and I still have pain, and I still have chronic inflammation from the stress. So what the hell was I doing all this for? Why the surgeries? Why the hormones? Why all the legal loopholes? Don't know. So then I return to that center. And I allow that don't know to have a compassionate response to what's coming up today. So I can skillfully act. So even though I'm officially a woman according to my insurance, according to my passport, according to my driver's license, the world has a way of introducing new forms of suffering that maybe you hadn't thought of before. So as my dad likes to say, yeah, you satisfied that urge to want to die, but then you became a woman, and that has all sorts of suffering on top of it in this culture. And then you decided to be transgender, and oh my gosh, that's a whole nother layer on top of that. And all I can say to that is, yeah, that's right. So what do we do? Because I'm officially a woman, and yet I'm still suffering. I still have to keep returning to this don't know. 4 years ago, the government said I am deserving of respect. 2 weeks ago, the government said that's no longer the case. How steady is my center, and how much do I believe in myself? That's something that's not just for trans people, that's for everybody. This great question of who am I and what is this? That transcends our understanding, that transcends what we think we know. This don't know allows us to connect with the love that is there across the difference and across disagreement. Don't know allows me, when every day I hear of a new bill that is making my life a little more stressful, to connect with that sadness and with that fear, and then to put it down so I have energy to actually respond, and I'm not destabilized and debilitated by the fear. Don't know allows me to investigate with courage. It allows me to act with compassion. It allows me to interact better with my family. So my mother, who's Korean and evangelical and cannot wrap her head around me, cannot begin to fathom or understand any of what I am or my decisions, still loves me. And when she accidentally calls me son by habit, because she tries, I can in that moment, if I put it all down, experience the fullness of that situation. There's the pain of the mistake. Yes, feel that. There's the appreciation of the correction, and you can feel that. And then let yourself feel the love intended in the mistake itself. All of that is true. But it doesn't get to arise if we're not putting it all down. If we're too quick to react or too quick to latch on to what we think someone means. So all that's great for interpersonal communication. But how do we practice with this don't know? When the world is literally on fire, Dharma Zen Center, you were surrounded by flames literally just weeks ago. How do we practice when there's a climate of fear for many of us? Jason Quinn, Jiddu Prepsanim, told me a story once when I was talking to him in an interview about how I struggle as a trans person who feels the disrespect of the culture viscerally every day. And he told me the story of the Buddha. And the Buddha had just created this beautiful Sangha, and you have these monks and you have these nuns gathered before him, and you have this great growing lay practitioner community in the back. And they're all gathered before him with his disciples, and he's teaching these beautiful teachings that have given us such life. And someone of a different religious persuasion is offended by this. And he comes up and walks past the monks. And he clears his throat and he spits in the Buddha's face. And Ananda, who's kind of like the Buddhist version of St. Peter, he's got a hot head. He wants to get into action and correct what happened and correct this disrespect. It's like, what is going on, Buddha? You have to correct this action. Look at this disrespect in front of all of these people. You cannot stand to let this go. And the Buddha, in front of the man who's just spit in his face, just wipes his face off and says, no problem. This man did not spit on me. He spit on his idea of me. We are in a similar situation when there is a lot of spitting going on right now. Some of us have a lot of spit on our faces. That leads us to a lot of fear and anticipatory anxiety because we don't know where the next loogie is going to come from. And while these fears may be grounded in the realities of our everyday situation, we can't stay stuck there if you want to wisely respond, because your hands are too full of what you're not putting down. So in the great story Dune, they have that phrase, fear is the mind killer. Fear is also the great story maker, especially in my life. If I am too afraid of don't know, and I don't trust my center, my fear wants to create all sorts of stories and alternative scenarios to fill in the don't know with what I think I know. And that just fuels more fear and more anxiety. So how do we practice when we're afraid? Well, Zen Master Song-san was asked about this very question decades ago, because wars and climate change is just ongoing. You know, we think the new sufferings are the new sufferings, but here we are as humans and we're doing the same old thing. And his response was that when this world is on fire, when this world is at war, shelter in the practice. So that's been my challenge this week, is coming back to don't know, sheltering in this practice, reminding myself, what does this practice actually teach? What is my experience? Well, we just chanted the Heart Sutra about an hour ago. In that Heart Sutra, we learned form is emptiness, emptiness form. Fantastic. There's the line, the bodhisattva depends on prajnaparamita, and the mind is no hindrance. Without any hindrance, no fears exist. There's a direct connection from mind to hindrance to fear. No mind, no hindrance, no hindrance, no fear. And when you don't have fear, you can do anything. So if the president says I exist, okay, I wake up, I work, I love my family, I eat, and I serve. When the president says I don't exist, okay, I wake up, I work, I eat, I serve. I probably also organize and vote, but I don't get so knocked off my center that it becomes so debilitating that I allow the terror to change me and make me less impactful and of less service. So some of you may be old enough to know Bobo the Clown. Like Bobo the Clown, that inflatable clown that you would punch as a kid. When hit, we get knocked down, and our strong centers help us return to this don't know. Today, my wife noticed I was crying this morning. And I hadn't noticed, but then when she told me, I was like, yeah, I am crying. And these tears have become lighter. What used to be heavy and so deeply personal has become much more light. It's a compassionate response to the daily sufferings of the society. So let the tears come, cry. Let your tears and the suffering of the world wake us up so we can actually help and be of service. This world desperately needs it, and we desperately need it. So may you try for 10,000 years nonstop. May you attain your true gender from before you were born, and may you use your enlightenment to save us all. Thank you. Wonderful. Questions?
What do you do for work?
So I run a college and a high school.
I have a question. You said you work at a college and a high school? Can you hear me okay, Ella?
It's a little hard, so I'm going to mute when you have a question, and I might need you to come closer to the mic if you're in the Dharma room.
That's what I'm doing, I'm coming closer. I was behind the guy that just spoke, so I thought it was close enough. So I'm Jennifer, and I'm a high school librarian in Kansas City, Kansas, nearby. Did you say you work at a high school and a college?
I do.
And so how, right now, with all of this that's going on, because I have students that are very fearful. We have a heavy Hispanic population at our school. And they've been doing their little cottage industry of making these red cards for their families to pick up. But do you have any suggestions? I mean, because you work with young people too, how can we help them? I mean, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but do you have other suggestions for how we be there for our students right now?
Yes, I have the privilege of working in the private sector, which can tell other entities that would tell us how to have our own policies impacted to just stay away because we could do our own thing. But in the public sector where you have to abide by what the DOE is saying or you lose your funding, etc., I think that don't know and compassionate response can actually come up with some incredibly creative solutions to the language that we use, because I think most of what people are getting hung up on and what they can actually enforce is the language you use. And language is incredibly empty. So we can have fun with that. Thank you.
Ella,
Hi, Robert.
hey, how are you?
Doing a little rough this morning, but it's good to see you.
Oh, your hair looks fine, by the way,
Oh,
so
thank you.
looks great. I was just thinking when you were talking, somebody, I think I remember reading that someone asked Zen Master Sung San once what he would do if he died and he woke up in the hell realm. And he said, I'd start a Zen center. And I thought, here we are, right?
Yeah.
So here in Maryland, where we just moved, me from Florida, you from wherever, I guess you were in California, right? And we've got this Zen Center now because we have three paying people on the rolls, so you have to recognize us, right? Because we play by the rules. We have a rule of law in Quantum School of Zen. And so here's our great opportunity, and believe me, all of us in our own way. I mean, Elon Musk just accessed my Social Security information. That makes me a little nervous, I gotta admit, okay? But to hear you speak of your experience in this, to hear your story, and I'm 38 years in AA, so listening to stories is very important to me, but to hear your story open my heart up and fill me with a courage I couldn't have by myself. And I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am for that. So bless you, as we say in my culture, bless your heart. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ella, I'd like to go back to Jennifer's question, because I think her question was not about teaching, it was about children who are afraid of deportation,
Ah,
parents who were deported. So the
yeah,
question of how to be an ally and
yeah.
how to be helpful. And there's a kind of an extension of this, that's my question. Jennifer's students know they can trust her. I reach out to certain communities that I'm not normally in a relationship to,
Yes.
they don't know that they can trust me. So anything you can say about helping people, being an ally in communities of which you are not a part, I think would be very helpful.
Thank you, Zamaster Bonhe. I think you just lived the answer. So you exemplify reaching out to communities of which you don't normally interact and letting them know that you are there. And Jennifer, you letting your students know you are there and you are safe. For many of us, that's our power. That's the way we can be an ally and show up. is to reach out to communities you don't necessarily belong to or interact with and let them know you're there. There are a lot of communities suffering, and the crossing the bridges is the solidarity we need to really see our universal humanity in one another. So I would say just exactly what Zen Master Bonhe is modeling. If you are not undocumented, maybe reach out to some undocumented people or organizations to let them know you are there, that you're another resource, that you desire to serve. I will say, this is not an indictment, but with all of the stressful things coming from the government towards the trans community, I've not heard from anybody but the trans community. And I think that's similar for people who are undocumented, people who rely on Social Security, people who are in all of these different situations. They feel alone. And when you feel alone, you feel even more scared. But it feels so great to know, oh, you may not be in the same situation, but we're along together. We've tied our boats together and we'll all rise.
Hi, Ella. My name is Garrett. Use they, them pronoun. And I am just wondering a little bit about your perspective in Zen. So often in so many different religions, you know, especially that have a very long history, thousands of years, it's very dichotomous. Men do this, women do this. And sometimes in my own identity, I'm like, okay, well, I feel like people look at me and say, okay, well, actually, you belong over here, right? Like, we know where you actually go. As a trans person, I'm just wondering, you know, what is your perspective in how Zen centers can be more accommodating to, well, I guess, cognizant of the history of Zen, and how can they progress to make this accommodating to people across the gender spectrum beyond just the binary that seems to exist a lot of the time?
Thank you. So every culture interacts with the ultimate. In one of my traditions, my Christian tradition, in Galatians, it's in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew or Gentile, slave or free. The ultimate is transcendent, right? Your true original substance knows no name or form. In the Zen tradition, you know, we're part of the Mahayana lineage. We have the Vimalakirti Sutra, and I encourage you to, if you don't have access to or haven't looked at it yet, go out to the online Zen study group. There's a few classes on the Vimalakirti Sutra. They're fantastic. There's a passage in there which essentially shows some gender constructivism, in which an arhat is turned into a woman, is transitioned, and you get to see his internal experience of that. So we know this is all empty. Gender is empty. Our name and form is empty. That's ultimate. But we're also in a society that is rigidly defined and uses rigid definitions to do what societies do, to organize and coerce people. So Zen, despite hitting the ultimate, interacts with other cultures and takes on those gendered expectations. So you have, you know, even in Zen traditions, the bhikkhunis, the nuns come behind the monks, right? It's human culture. So we're gonna interact with the ultimate that's beyond name and form. And then we have to put it into language and we have to interact with society. So then it becomes all muddled up with name and form again. So how do we do that skillfully in our centers and in our sanghas? I think we hold it loosely. I think it's helpful for trans people if we have the courage and the strength to hold that loosely, and it's helpful for the sangha to hold it loosely. When I show up to your sangha, Kansas Zen Center, my pronouns are she, her. Please show me where I can safely use the restroom. That's it. So I've also found if you only don't know and your only desire is to be helpful, that will transcend a whole lot of bullshit.